Okay, go ahead.
We talked about privacy and such. What role do you see the courts possibly having in helping or hurting this?
What role do the courts play? Well, you know, speaking as someone who lives in the UK, I've really come to appreciate the role of the American judiciary in checking the otherwise deadlocked and dysfunctional Congress, and also the administrative branch. That although, especially at the state level, the courts sometimes get it really wrong, and although the Supreme Court's composition lacks for being, you know, for a certain je ne sais quoi, nevertheless, the ability to do impact litigation is really important. It's a really important tool that's not in the toolkit of activists in other countries. You know, when you look at like the history of strong cryptography, which is, you know, a key technology to protecting our privacy and for dissidents all over the world to protecting their privacy, and that's under assault now from the FBI. It used to be that the NSA said that any code, any encoding system that you had that would make something so secret that the NSA couldn't read it was a munition, and that you couldn't possess it or export it because it was like exporting cluster bombs. And there were lots of arguments made for why we should be allowed to have secrets. Banks, who normally you think of as having a lot of juice in Congress, banks went to Congress and said, look, if the NSA can break into our systems, if we're only allowed to use crypto that the NSA can break, the mafia will figure out how to break it too, and so will rival governments and their spies and so on. We need good crypto, not crypto that has been deliberately weakened so that the NSA can backdoor it. And nobody was responsive to that argument. The national security argument trumped everything. People made arguments about the technical sufficiency of the crypto the NSA said that they were going to allow. They said it's good enough. And computer scientists, cryptographers, mathematicians, you know, they presented learned papers about it and said we could break it. John Gilmore, who's one of the founders of EFF, and was an early employee of Sun Microsystems and helped design the Solaris and the Spark chip and write GCC. John built a computer to crack the cipher the NSA said was good enough for civilian use. He spent $250,000 on it, and in 2 hours it could break anything encoded with this civilian use cipher. And so he's like, this is the entire economy of America is being protected by a wall that you can surmount for a mere $250,000. Nobody cared. But Daniel Bernstein, a mathematician at UC Berkeley, published this computer programs that could encrypt data more thoroughly than the NSA allowed. And the Electronic Frontier Foundation represented him in a First Amendment lawsuit that argued that he had that his code was a form of expressive speech, and that the way mathematicians talk to each other is with math, and code is math, and that the prohibition on the publication of this code violated the First Amendment. And not only did the Ninth Circuit buy that argument, but the Ninth Circuit Appellate Division on bank bought that decision as well, and the NSA just sort of went home. And, you know, as we know, they went home and did some other stuff, but they gave up on this program, which is really important because, you know, there's only really one person who's in a position to know what the NSA can and can't do who's talking to the rest of us, and that's Ed Snowden. And Snowden says the NSA can't break crypto. Right? They do lots of other things. They try to subvert the computers that you encrypt and decrypt things with so that they can see it before it's encrypted, or they can see it after it's decrypted, but they can't break the crypto itself. And so if we can build trustworthy computers, we can then use the crypto to contain that trust between, or maintain that trust between two parties. So that impact litigation is pretty cool stuff. Obviously, it'd be great if we could also have a functional Congress that made evidence-based policy. And, you know, those of you who are worried about that stuff, you know, I'm not American, I don't get to vote, I don't get to contribute money to these organizations, but there's a group called Mayday PAC that Lawrence Lessig started after he concluded that all of the other fights about bad policy were always foundering on the cliffs of corruption. That there's a big political science study recently done where they looked at 20 years of regulatory rulings for the administrative branch, and they found that in 90% of them, those went against the interests of the constituents and in favor of the interests of the industries that were meant to be regulated by the administrative branch. And so this corruption is endemic, and it's getting worse because of Citizens United and the increasing presence of money in our electoral system. So Larry started this thing called Mayday PAC, which is a super PAC that raises money to elect candidates that agree to vote to abolish super PACs. It's a really cool snake eating its tail kind of thing. He raised $6 million between June 1st and July 4th. They're backing, I think, 5 candidates in this election cycle, and then they're going to use what they've learned from that to try and back a full slate in the next one. All small money, all $100, $200 donations. A shocking amount of the money in politics is donated by just a few hundred Americans. Something like 80% is donated by just a few hundred Americans who effectively control the levers of power. So that needs to change, and the courts at least are not as beholden, right? It's the courts clearly are part of the establishment, and big money has influence on them too. But if you're a congressperson, like about 4 hours in 8 is spent just calling millionaires and raising money every day you're in Congress, calling millionaires, raising money for your next election campaign, right? I mean that's half your working day every day, and so that really affects the way that our politics go. And judges, for all that they can be terrible, and especially elected judges can be really terrible and make really dumb decisions. You may have heard about the lady who just got put in jail for not mowing her lawn, that sort of thing. And we have civil forfeiture in small towns where people are having everything they own stolen because they say so, by the cops and by the courts. But even so, they are an important check on a broken Congress that's increasingly corrupt.